After a long day of work and you get on the couch and you throw on a comic book movie, it's easy to throw on something like Captain America the Winter Soldier or The Dark Knight or Avengers Endgame and some other universally loved comic book movie. But it takes a real geek to admit to loving some of the worst comic book films ever recorded on camera. And we here at the Lapsed Geek Podcast are just those types of geeks. So geek out with us, make some popcorn, sit down in front of your computer as we count down 10 terrible comic book movies we torture ourselves with periodically and absolutely love. Number 10. Blade Trinity. The third installment into the otherwise amazing Blade trilogy was so bad that we almost endorsed Wesley choking David Goyer. Sexy Dracula, actors slurring their words due to their prosthetic fangs, and a nonsensical plot involving Blade being hunted because he killed familiars pretending to be vampires. Seriously? Blade's been killing familiars and assaulting cops in broad daylight since the first film. Such a terrible premise to base a movie on that we kind of get why Wesley had to be high to film this movie. But despite the terrible script, an uncooperative main star, and some of the worst action in the series, we have a soft spot for this movie, and it's probably in our skulls. Wesley was disappointing in this, and Jessica Biel was just okay, but Ryan Reynolds showed his action movie chops that would later pay off in the Deadpool franchise. We also love Parker Posey in anything. Sue us. We also love the idea of farming humans for blood, which was also Deacon Frost's plan in the first Blade movie, which eagle-eyed geeks will see in the opening scene. Hey, we like Blade. Even the mediocre TV show that only got one season. What can we do? Number 9. Daredevil. It's refreshing to remember a time when Michael Clark Duncan could play the Kingpin and no one knew the word woke yet. Yes, D'Onofrio is the superior actor and more comic book accurate, but Duncan was physically imposing in a way D'Onofrio isn't. We'll still take D'Onofrio over Duncan, but Duncan wasn't all bad. This movie isn't really all bad either, but more of a product of its time, like the first Crow film, which was also a superior film. Affleck is fine, Garner is fine, Farrell is fine, and it's a perfectly fine 90s comic book film that was still stuck in trying to come up with a catchphrase for its main character rather than developing that main character's character, and we feel like we're saying character a lot. They never really answer why Matt Murdock feels the need to dress up as a devil and be a vigilante when he's a lawyer who supposedly believes in the justice system. The R-rated director's cut is a far superior film that only geeks watched, but it contained 30 minutes of extra footage and it's basically a completely different movie. Daredevil is a fine, dumb movie, however, and, there's nothing wrong with that. Number 8. Bloodshot. As geeks in the 90s, we were required to love Valiant comics. Valiant was the serious answer to the steroid-ridden superheroes and superheroines with boob jobs and anorexia. Now understand that we didn't always want to love Valiant, but it wasn't a choice. It was forced on us, kind of like Vertigo. Bloodshot was one of the coolest heroes in the Valiant catalog and definitely the most movie-ready, so what went wrong? It had Vin Diesel, who was making billions with the Fast and the Furious franchise, so drawing power isn't really a question, although that's still questionable. Somehow, though, the movie felt cheap despite a decent budget, and the third act completely falls apart with an over-reliance on CGI and a sci-fi bent, when all the movie really needed was a firefight the likes of a John Woo movie, and we're talking hard-boiled John Woo, okay? This, though, is a personal guilty pleasure of mine because I never believed that we'd get a Bloodshot movie, and one that wasn't direct to streaming. The movie even does a great job of adapting the feel of the Bloodshot comics, with the titular character often unsure of his own past. It's just too bad that its failure meant we'd never get any other Valiant movies, because I'm still pulling for you, Ninjak. Number 7. Batman Forever. This movie usually gets a pass for being terrible because Batman and Robin raised that bar so high that most movies looked okay by comparison. But this movie did ditch the Gothic City for a neon Gotham City for starters, which some fans did like at first. And it included 2 unbelievably over-the-top performances. And we get this feeling that Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face also gets a pass for being bad because he's standing next to Jim Carrey's Riddler, who certainly never figured out the riddle that is subtlety. But as bad as this was, there was also a lot of fun to be had. This was without a doubt more super-heroic than the Burton Batmans, and consequently more action-oriented, lighthearted, and, as mentioned, fun. It also did a better job of making it feel like Batman had been operating in Gotham for some time, like him mentioning that the heist at the opening was the 2-year anniversary of Two-Face's first. At the time, it was a welcome change for some fans from the overly serious Burton films, and we think it's a fun, if flawed, watch. Number 6, Ghost Rider. Nicolas Cage would not have been on our list of Johnny Blaze casting, alright? But Nicolas Cage is Nicolas Cage, and we're definitely going to give him a shot in the role, especially knowing how much he loves comic books. What we got was a tepid by-the-numbers version of Ghost Rider, though, that even Nicolas Cage couldn't animate. We're not even going to get into the villains because they were less frightening than the monsters from Monsters, Inc. and looked like rejects from the Elektra movie. The plot, was there a plot? We don't care. But it's still cool to see Cage transform into our favorite spirit of vengeance and wreak havoc on a motorcycle. There was a time we didn't think we'd ever get a Ghost Rider movie, so we're not choosy. Number 5, Punisher, Warzone. We're pretty sure that if we were 12 years old that this would be our favorite movie in the entire universe. It's unapologetically violent, gruesome, and attempts to put the fan favorite Ennis Punisher on the big screen. And perhaps trying to be too comic accurate was the problem. The bright colored lighting and attempt to look like the comics clashed with the tone of the film and gave the movie a cheap look sometimes, like a direct-to-video look. Jigsaw didn't quite work, and the plot consequently didn't gel, especially with his brother. There were more than a few questionable acting choices, and the violence bordered on sadism sometimes, and could be off-putting. But this is the closest to comic book Punisher we've ever gotten, so it's got a place in our hearts. Number 4, Suicide Squad. If you ever want an example of a movie made by committee, just watch the opening of this film, because there are 3 of them. Some of the members of the team are introduced. Then Waller has her dinner meeting, reintroducing the squad. And then the team is brought to the airfield, and they're introduced again. The movie is a schizophrenic mess, but there is a style to it. You can see the remnants of what Hader was trying to do before the studio took the film from him and butchered it in an editing room. It's unfortunate that we'll never see a Hader cut, but even the movie we got is still a fun romp with good performances from Margot Robbie, Will Smith, and Viola Davis, among others. Sure, you have to turn off your brain to enjoy it, and it turns into another CGI fight against a generic villain at the end, but we liked it. Number 3, Judge Dredd. No, not Dredd. That was a fantastic movie that we love. This is a terrible movie with Sylvester Stallone that we also love. Because no one thought that a Judge Dredd movie done by Stallone was going to be good, okay? But this movie did do some cool things. The Judge costumes, while a bit too shiny, were actually fairly comic accurate. The Lawgiver and the Lawmaster looked and functioned well, and Mega City 1 looked really good. The ABC robot was a cool character from Dredd's extended universe, Chief Justice Fargo's long walk into the cursed earth, and the Angel Gang, they all worked. And we could take the catchphrases and the hammy dialogue, and Dredd taking off his helmet, and the forced romance, and the meh villain, and the I am the law. But what we can't take, and I mean this with every fiber of my being, is Rob Schneider. Seriously, this movie needs a Schneider cut, where someone edits the film to remove as much of Schneider as possible while still making sure the film makes sense. Now, that would leave us with basically a 15-minute movie, but a far superior one at that. Number 2, Spawn. Oh, God bless the 90s. Mountain Dew drinking, extreme, big guns, big pecs, comics revolution. Some of you kids may not remember, but there was a time when Spawn topped comic book sales for years over books like The Uncanny X-Men and Justice League and everything. Well, Spawn the movie was going to be more badass, darker, and more extreme than Batman, and for some reason, a lot of that had to do with a CGI cape. Another movie that suffered from being a movie of its time, it especially relied too much on CGI that simply wasn't ready to pull off the effects that the film asked from it. We keep thinking of Blade, where the finale was originally intended to have Deacon Frost turn into a huge blood monster, until they realized they couldn't pull off the effect, so they pivoted and they just had a sword fight. The scenes of Hell and Malebolgia and The Violator pushed what could be done at the time, but most of the time, it just took us out of the movie and into a video game cutscene. But sometimes we like to revisit a simpler time that was the 90s, and Spawn was the epitome of the 90s superhero movie. Now, before we get to number 1, we just like to say that if you've gotten this far, maybe you'd like to go down there, give us a like, give us a subscribe to help support the channel. We here at the Labs Geek Podcast love making these types of videos because we have little else in our lives and we pretend that these give it meaning. But we'd also love to hear from you, and we'd love your support. We do 1-minute comic book reviews, trailer breakdowns, tier lists like the one you've hopefully just watched. And we'd love to thank you for all the love and support you've given us so far. The channel is growing, and we love hanging around with you guys on the only channel by geeks for geeks. So thank you again for all your support. We love you guys. And now, back to the list. Number 1, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. No, this movie didn't really resemble the Alan Moore comic on which it was based. And yes, it drove Moore away from supporting any film projects based on his work forever. And yes, it also retired Sean Connery from acting because it was so bad. But what can we say? We like this movie. First of all, we dare you to try and sin see the first League of Extraordinary Gentlemen trade paperback. Let's just say that some stories don't translate from the page to the screen. And second, this movie was fun as hell. It's the action movie version of Moore's comic, but it does it with a lot of style. The story isn't even bad, and it seems like most critics hated it because of what it failed to live up to, rather than what the movie was. We'll still watch it any day, and the only thing that sucks is that we never got more entries into this universe because the League through different time periods would have been awesome. The biggest problem with this movie is that most of the audience probably didn't know who Alan Quatermain, Tom Sawyer, Mina Harker, Captain Nemo, and Dorian Gray were, which destroys the novelty and the uniqueness of this fantastic concept. If you haven't seen this movie, go watch it. And if you have, go see it again and then tell us it's not a great time. And that brings us to the end of our list. Tell us what terrible comic book movies you love down in the comments, and maybe we'll make another one of these lists, because we'll probably agree with you. We love bad films. Thanks for checking out the video and for all your support and love. We love you guys, and we're going to see you in the next one.